Hello, and welcome to
Yay.
It
Oh, and or hate it.
podcast, where we will be trying to answer the age-old question, are people born innocent or
Or guilty.
right? So we're going to
It's
be
this month's question.
examining various texts to assess this question. The text we're going to be examining today is Plato's Cave. So
Heard?
we'll be reading it. I think Brian is going to be reading the Socrates parts, and I will be reading, say the name again, Glaucon?
Glaucon.
Glaucon.
I've got a
Okay,
pronunciation for it. You ready?
Glaucon.
Glaucon. Okay, so I'll
Glaucon.
be
Sounds
reading
like
Glaucon.
glaucoma.
And we'll be
And
discussing, analyzing it. So if you are a curious thinker, a deep thinker, please subscribe to our podcast. Click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And yeah, we'll be diving deep into some classic philosophy answering this question.
and this is Plato, the Allegory of the Cave, and it's from the Republic. Plato's Republic, which is his most famous work. Plato writes what he said happened to Socrates, but Socrates is like Jesus. We don't know if he existed or not. It could just be like an amalgamation of a bunch of characters. But there's Plato and Xenophon and Aristotle a little bit that wrote stuff about Socrates, but he may not have even been a real person. Um, but this is Plato uh, writing about Socrates, and Socrates is trying to suss out goodness. So it helps us. This is going to help us solve this question or approach it a little bit.
Right.
Anyway, so then last time we did Jesus, so this time we're doing Socrates. So very
Yes.
similar.
I'm already
Um,
familiar with Socrates to an extent. I always love that one quote, the greatest knowledge is knowing that we know nothing, because it encourages us to keep an open mind. The more you know, the more aware you are of what you don't know. And I think it's important to stay humble, stay skeptical, and remain curious with an open mind. So I like that quote by Socrates
That's
myself.
that's from Apologia, which means defense,
Yeah.
um, and that's referred to as the epistemological concession. You have to make If you make the epistemological concession at the beginning of anything that you take on, you're supposed to be like an empty vessel and be able to take it in a lot better, which is cool. You're supposed to be like that.
Yes.
That makes perfect sense.
So I'm going
What is it?
into this text with that in mind.
Yes. And hubris, because the Greeks said that hubris was the worst thing when you're cocky or arrogant. And I can say definitely from life experience, anytime I've ever felt that I'm really good at something or that I'm faring very well, that hubris kicks in and you immediately trip over yourself.
Right.
You immediately screw
Because
up. You should always be humble.
if you get to a point where you feel like you've mastered the craft of something or you know everything, then you stagnate and you reach a plateau. That doesn't give you any room to grow or further explore. If you
Hmm.
think you know everything, then you're not going to grow and learn anything else. So,
Yes. Yes.
um,
Agree.
cool. So we're going to be reading Allegory of the Cave from the Republic, Book 7, 514a through 521d. And this is
Nerd.
from the website faculty.tamuc.edu.
So it's from Texas A&M. So thank
Yeah.
you very much for putting it in here. You can find Republic at any library. It's definitely easy to find. The Republic is a great. Plato's a cool person. The only thing I don't like about Plato is that he said he would ban the Iliad and the Odyssey if he had his way because he thought that it humanized the gods, and I think that's a disgusting thing to say because he needs those for most of his stuff to make sense. So he's kind of like using it and then saying he'd ban it. I didn't. That's the thing I never liked about Plato. And Plato was also into eugenics, which was a pretty rough thing.
Yeah.
But other than that, Plato's kind of an interesting fella. I don't know. He's interesting.
All right.
Now, yeah,
So Brian's going to read Socrates. I'll read
Glaucon,
Glaucon. And
Glaucon
here we
sounds like
go.
glaucoma. All right,
Let's
here we go.
dive in.
And now I said, let me show in a figure how far our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Behold, human beings living in an underground cave, which has a mouth open toward the light and reaching all along the cave. Here they have been from their childhood, and have their legs and necks chained so that they cannot move and can only see before them, being prevented by the chains from turning round their heads. Above and behind them, a fire is blazing at a distance, and between the fire and the prisoners, there is a raised way. And you will see, if you look, a low wall built along the way, like the screen which marionette players have in front of them, over which they show the puppets.
I see.
And do you see, I said, men passing along the way, carrying all sorts of vessels and statues and figures of animals made of wood and stone and various materials, which appear over the wall. Some of them are talking, others silent.
You have shown me a strange image, and they are strange prisoners.
Like ourselves, I replied, and they see only their own shadows, or the shadows of one another, which the fire throws on the opposite wall of the cave.
True, he said. How could they see anything but the shadows if they were never allowed to move their heads?
And of the objects which are being carried in like manner, they would only see the shadows.
Yes, he said.
And if they were able to converse with one another, would they not appear that they were naming what was actually before them?
Very true.
And suppose further that the prison had an echo which came from the other side, which would they not be sure to fancy when one of the passer-bys spoke that the voice which they heard came from the passing shadow?
No question, he replied.
To them, I said, the truth would be literally nothing but the shadows of the images.
That is certain.
And now look again and see what will naturally follow if the prisoners are released and disabused of their error. At first, when any of them is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck round and walk and look toward the light, he will suffer sharp pains. The glare will distress him, and he will be unable to see the realities of which in his former state he had seen the shadows. And then conceive one saying to him that what he saw before was an illusion, but that now, when he is approaching nearer to being, and his eye turned towards more real existence, he has a clearer vision. What will be his reply? And you may further imagine that his instructor is pointing to the objects as they pass and requiring him to name them. Will he not be perplexed? Will he not fancy that the shadows which he formerly saw are truer than the objects which are now shown to him?
Far truer.
And if he is compelled to look straight at the light, will he not have pain in his eyes, which would make him turn away to take in the objects of vision which he can see, and which he conceive to be in reality clearer than the things which now being shown to him?
True, he now.
And suppose once more that he is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent and held fast until he's forced into the presence of the sun himself, and he is not likely to be pained. Is he not likely to be pained, irritated? When he approaches the light, his eyes will be dazzled, and he will not be able to see anything at all of what are now called realities.
Not all in a moment, he said.
He will require to grow accustomed to sight of the upper world. At first, he will see the shadows best, next the reflections of men and other objects in the water, and then the objects themselves. Then he will gaze upon the light of the moon and the stars and the spangled heavens, and he will see the sky and the stars by night better than the sun or the light of sun by day.
Certainly.
Last of, he will be able to see the sun and not mere reflections of him in the water, but he will see him in his own proper place and not another, and he will contemplate him as he is.
Certainly.
He will then proceed to argue that this is who gives the season and the years, and is the guardian of all that is in the visible world, and is certain the cause of all things, which he and his fellows have been accustomed to behold.
Clearly, he said, He would first see the sun and then reason about him.
And when he remembered his old habitation and the wisdom of the cave and his fellow prisoners, do you not suppose that he would felicitate himself on the change and pity them?
Certainly he would.
And if they were in the habit of conferring honors among themselves on those who were quickest to observe the passing shadows and to remark which of them went before and which followed after, and which were together, and who were therefore best able to draw conclusions as to the future, do you think that he would care for such honors and glories, or envy the possessors of them? Would he not say with Homer, better to be the poor servant of a poor master, and to endure anything rather than think as they do and live after their manner?
Yes, he said, I think that he would rather suffer anything than entertain these false notions and live in this miserable manner.
Imagine once more, I said, such such an one coming suddenly out of the sun to be replaced in his old situation. Would he not be certain to have his eyes full of darkness?
To be sure, he said.
And if there were a contest, and he had to compete in measuring the shadows with the prisoners who had never moved out of the cave, while his sight was still weak, and before his eyes had become steady, and time which would be needed to acquire this new habit of sight might be very considerable, would he not be ridiculous? Men would say of him that he went down, that he went and down he came without his eyes, and that he was better not even to think of ascending. And if anyone tried to loose another and lead him up to the light, let them only catch the offender, and they would put him to death.
No question, he said.
The entire allegory, I said, you may now append, dear Glaucon, to the previous argument. The prisoner house in the world of sight. The light of the fire is the sun, and you will not misapprehend me if you interpret the journey upwards to be the ascent of the soul into the intellectual world according to my poor belief, which at your desire I have expressed, whether rightly or wrongly, God knows. But whether true or false, my opinion is that the world of knowledge, the idea of good, appears last of all, and is seen only with an effort, and when seen is also inferred to be the universal author of all things, beautiful and right, parent of light, and of the Lord of light is the visible world, and the immediate source of the reason and truth in the intellectual, and that is the power upon which he would act rationally, either in public or private life, must have his eyes fixed.
I agree, he said, as far as I am able to understand you.
Moreover, I said, you must not wonder that those who attain to this beatific vision are unwilling to descend to human affairs, for their souls are ever hastening in the upper world where they desire to dwell, which desire of theirs is very natural, if our allegory may be trusted.
Yes, very natural.
And is there anything surprising in one who passes from divine contemplations to the evil state of man, misbehaving himself in a ridiculous manner, if, while his eyes are blinking and before he has become accustomed to the surrounding darkness, he is compelled to fight in the courts or in other places about the images of the shadows of images of justice, and is endeavoring to meet the conceptions of those who have never yet seen absolute justice?
Anything but surprising, he replied.
Anyone who has common sense will remember that the bewilderments of the eyes are of two kinds and arise from two causes, either from coming out of the light or from going into the light, which is true of the mind's eye quite as much as the bodily eye. And he who remembers this when he sees anyone whose vision is perplexed and weak will not be too ready to laugh. And he will first ask whether that soul of man has come out of the brighter light and is unable to become accustomed to the dark, or having turned from the darkness to the day is dazzled by excess of light. And he will count the one happy in this condition of state of being, and he will pity the other. Or if we have a mind to laugh at the soul which comes from below into the light, there will be more reason in this than in the laugh which greets him who remains from above, who returns from above out of the light into the cave.
That, he said, is a very just distinction.
But then, if I am right, certain professors of education must be wrong when they say that they can put a knowledge into the soul which was not there before, like sight into blind eyes.
They undoubtedly say this, he replied.
Whereas our argument shows that the power and capacity of learning exist in the soul already, and that just as the eye was unable to turn from the darkness to light without the whole body, so too the instrument of knowledge can only be the movement of the whole soul, be turned from the world of becoming into that of being, and learn by degrees to endure the sight of being and the brightness and best of being, or in other words, of the good.
Very true.
And must there not be some art of which will reflect conversion in the easiest and quickest manner, not implanting the faculty of sight, for that exists already and has been turned in the wrong direction and is looking away from the truth?
Yes, he said, such an art may be presumed.
And whereas the so-called virtues of the soul seem to be akin to bodily qualities, for even when they are original, innate, they can be implanted later by the habit and exercise. The wisdom of more than anything else contains a divine element which always remains, and by the conversion is rendered useful and profitable, only on the other hand, hurtful and useless. Did you ever observe the narrow intelligence flashing from the keen eye of a clever rogue? How eager he is now clearly his paltry soul sees the way to the end. He is reverse of blind, but his keen eyesight is forced into the service of evil and is mischievous in proportion to his cleverness.
Very true, he said.
But what if there has been a circumcision of such natures in the days of youth, and they had been severed from those sensual pleasures, such as eating and drinking, which, like leaden weights, were attached to them at their birth, and which drag them down and turn their vision of the soul upon the things that are below. And if I say they had been released from the implements and turned in the opposite direction, the very same faculty in them would have seen the truth as keenly as they would see what their eyes are turned now.
Very likely.
Let's see. Hold on. Yes, I said. And there is another thing which is likely, or rather a necessary influence from which has proceeded, that may the uneducated and uninformed of truth, nor yet those who never make an end and to their education, will be able ministers of state, nor the former, because they have no single aim of duty, which is the rule of their actions, private as well as public, nor the latter, because they will not act all except upon compulsion, fancying that they are already dwelling upon the islands of the best.
Very true, he replied.
Then I said, the business of who are the founders of the state will be compelled the best minds to attain that knowledge, which they have already shown to be the greatest of all. They must continue to ascend until they arrive at the good. But when they ascend and see enough, we must not allow them to do as they do now.
What do you mean?
I mean, they may remain in the upper world, but they must be allowed. They must be made to descend again among the prisoners in the cave and partake of their labors and the honors, whether they are worth having or not.
But is not this unjust? He said. Ought we to give them a worse life when they might have better?
Ah, you have again forgotten, my friend, I said. The intention of the legislator, who did not aim at making one class in the state happy above the rest, the happiness was to be in the whole state and held in the citizens together by persuasion and necessity, making them benefactors of the state and therefore benefactors of one another. To this end, he created them, not to please themselves, but to be his instruments in binding up the state.
True, he said. I had forgotten.
Ooh, let me see. Okay. Let's say this seems like it's a little longer, but we're almost done. Observe, Glaucon, that there will be no injustice in compelling our philosophers to have a care of providence of others. We shall explain to them that in our other state, men of their class are not obliged to share in the toils of politics. And this is reasonable, for they grow up in their own sweet will, and the government would rather not have them. Being self-taught, they cannot be expected to show any gratitude for a culture which they have never received. But we have brought you into the world to be rulers of the hive, kings of yourselves and of other citizens, and have educated you far better and more perfectly than they have been educated, and you are better able to share in the double duty. Wherefore, each of you, when your turn comes, must go down to the general underground abode and get the habit of seeing in the dark. When you have acquired the habit, you will see 10,000 times better than the inhabitants of the cave, and you will know what the several images are and what they represent, because you have seen the beautiful and just and good in their truth. And thus, our state, which is also yours, will be a reality and not a dream only. And you will be administered in a spirit unlike that of other states, in which men fight with one another about the shadows only and are distracted in struggle for power. And in their eyes is a great good. Whereas the truth is the state in which the rulers are most reluctant to govern is always the best and most quietly governed, and the state in which they are most eager, the worst.
Quite true, he replied.
And will our pupils, when they hear this, refuse to take their turn at the toils of state, when they are allowed to spend the greater part of their time with one another in the heavenly light?
Impossible, he answered, for they are just men, and the commands which we impose upon them are just. They can be no doubt, there can be no doubt that every one of them will take office as a stern necessity, and not after the fashion of our present rulers of state.
Yes, my friend, I say. And there lies the point. You must contrive. Did I cut you off? Oh, you must contrive for your future rulers another and better life than that of a ruler. And then they may have a well ordered state. For only in the state which offers this will they rule who are truly rich, not in silver and gold, but in virtue and wisdom, which are the true blessings of life. Whereas if they go to the administration of public affairs, poor and hungering after their own private advantage, thinking that hence they are to snatch the chief good order, there can never be, or there will be fighting about office, and the civil and domestic broils which thus arise will be the ruin of the rulers themselves and of the whole state.
Most true, he replied.
And the only life which looks down upon the life of political ambition is that of a true philosopher. Do you know of any other?
Indeed, I do not, he said.
And those who govern ought not to be lovers of the task, for if they are, there will be rival lovers, and they will fight.
No question.
Who then are those whom we shall compel to be guardians? Surely they will be the men who are wisest about the affairs of state, and by whom state is best administered, and whom the same time have other honors and another and a better life than that of politics.
They are the men, and I will choose them, he replied.
And now shall we consider in what way such guardians will be produced, and how they are to be brought from the darkness to light. And some are said to have ascended from the world below to the gods.
By all means, he replied.
The process, I said, is not the turning over of an oyster shell, but the turning round of a soul passing from day, which is little better than the night to the truer day of being. That is, the ascent from below, which we affirm to be true philosophy.
Yay!
Yeah. Oh.
All right. So this is the Love It or Hate It podcast. So do we love this? Do we hate this? Do we feel
I like
somewhere
it.
in the middle?
I'll take it.
I love it just because
Right.
it's very thought-provoking. Now, as far as answering our question, what does it say about are people born inherently innocent or guilty? I feel like there's multiple ways you can interpret this, just like any text, really. But I feel like it seems to suggest that people are born innocent. Like if you look at the cave, obviously the cave is analogous to um, our limited perceptions with our societal constraints, our cultural constraints, how limited we are in how we perceive reality based on what we're born into. And to
Mhm.
me, that suggests a sense of innocence. Like we can't really help how we perceive the world. But then, after we become enlightened, step out of the cave, see the sun, experience the truth, it does sort of suggest that we have a responsibility to communicate that truth to everyone in the cave,
So
right?
is the person who was in the cave that released, is that like a Jesus character or is that everybody?
Well, I interpret this as saying that everyone has the potential to leave the cave and become
Okay.
enlightened.
I heard somebody, one of the things I saw online when I was researching this, they likened this story to The Matrix.
Oh, yeah, I
Yeah.
can
So
see
I mean,
that.
I don't know. That's kind of easy, but yeah. Okay, I'll take that. That's kind
Yeah,
of
if the
it's
cave
easy.
is analogous to a matrix, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. But so I guess that everybody who reads this imagines that they've escaped the cave.
I don't necessarily guess that.
You don't
Um,
think so?
I mean, you're just assuming everyone is like a know-it-all. Like
No,
everyone
I'm
thinks they've
assuming that
already
everybody who
figured it
reads
all out.
this, I'm saying I assume that everybody who reads this doesn't imagine themselves still trapped in the cave. They imagine that they're one of the people that are out of the cave, right? Just
I,
in knowing the story, ipso facto, you're not in the cave anymore, so to speak. It's like you know about the Matrix now, kind of thing.
well, yeah, I mean, I don't know though. I can't really assume what everyone else thinks.
It's just more. It's more. It's kind of like if when you watch the Matrix, if somebody tells you, you know, we could actually be in the Matrix, um, they're already the champion because they're the one that knows they're in it, kind of thing. Like they're the enlightened one in the conversation. Just in having said it, it kind of gives them the you get the a priori argument.
Yeah, but I'm
I
sure
don't
there's
know.
a lot of people that read this and don't think anything of it. They don't accept any of this as truth. So
Oh
it
no, I
just
get that.
depends. I feel like everyone's gonna have a slightly different interpretation of it. I just don't want to assume what everyone else
No,
thinks.
no, I'm saying that it's an advantage if somebody reads this and they think that it's allegorical to the world around them, that it wouldn't be convenient to imagine that you're stuck in the cave. It'd be more convenient to imagine that you're one of the enlightened ones. Kind of like if somebody talks to somebody about enlightenment, it's more convenient to imagine you're enlightened than you're just dark. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Nobody imagines they're the bad guy in history. They always imagine they're the good guy
Well, it's
in
definitely
history.
like
More
nobody
convenient.
wants to think of themselves
Yeah,
as um ignorant. No one
sure.
wants to be ignorant.
No,
Um,
no,
but that
not at all.
doesn't mean people just go around assuming they're enlightened either.
No, no, I'm just saying I'm not saying they're correct. I'm just saying that it's more convenient, especially for your own truth, to to feel like, oh well, I'm one of those. You know, I get it, I get it. You know, that kind
Yeah,
of thing. But in reality, that might be you still in the cave looking at the shadow, kind of
exactly.
thing.
Like I
Yeah,
feel like
gotcha.
if you approach this material like Socrates with an open mind, like just
Mhm,
accepting that it's okay to not know anything. I feel like a lot of people crave like certainty and they crave knowledge because it makes them feel powerful and it makes them feel in control, makes them feel like they're secure. But when
mhm,
you can just accept that it's okay to be ignorant, like it's okay to not know everything, then
mhm,
that invites more knowledge. So I feel like if you are someone kind of like me who approaches the material with an open mind, you're not going to be reading this and the whole time think, oh, I'm already out of the cave. I'm already enlightened, you know?
I get you. I get you. I mean, you feel like it's hard to explain yourself from the bad angle, but I get you. I that's one of the things that I appreciate about the Socratic issues is that that's you should if it's proper learning, you should feel dumber when you get done because in learning something, you learn all the things around it and all the things dealing with it that you don't know. You may know that one direct thing, but now you realize there's a whole list of things you don't know. You should put a book down and feel like you're a little dumber at the end of the day, and
Yeah,
that's kind of keeps your hubris right.
I hear what you're saying. I
Yeah.
just don't like the term dumber just because you can read a bunch of things, but
Hmm.
intelligence is more complicated than just like memorizing history books or memorizing facts or
Hmm.
there's so many different forms of intelligence. There's social intelligence, emotional intelligence, musical intelligence.
Mhm.
So I just don't like the term you should feel dumber. Maybe you should just be aware that you have a lot more to learn. I, you
Sure.
know,
I mean, I use the dumber because I'm like same thing with the Socratic thing. You have Socrates, he's what, 78 years old, and he's getting ready to kill himself. And his most famous statement is that he doesn't know anything. You know, the smartest guy in the world doesn't know a thing. I think that's kind of
that's
him doing that.
actually an intelligent thing. If
Yeah.
you are comfortable enough to admit that nothing is certain, that's actually quite an intelligent thing. That's not a dumb thing.
No,
Uh,
but I don't mind I don't mind the term dumb though. I don't mind it. It doesn't bother me. Like I don't think I I would be perfectly fine with calling myself a dumb person because no, because there's so many things that you can hear you could spend your life thinking one thing and then turn around and somebody will say something like, my goodness, my entire life I did not know that was a fact.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, when they would say wind chill factor, you know, when they're doing the weather, I thought they were saying windshield factor. So it was the temperature of the windshield of your car. And
Yeah.
that made perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
And I mean, but my life wasn't upset any. The apple cart didn't tip when somebody told me the difference, but I was completely wrong. You know, but that's as an example. And I mean, you know, still at my age, I still have those moments. Everybody does. If you don't have those moments, there's something wrong. You should
Well,
constantly be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that's the case. You know, that's, and I make that kind of, that brings the hubris back to me. It reminds me that I'm not that bright. You know, it's, I thought this my whole life, or I thought this, and then, and that's constant, just anything, you
well,
know.
just because like you misheard something, that doesn't mean you're dumb. So acquiring knowledge doesn't
Mhm.
make you smarter or dumber. It's what you do with the knowledge that is a fair assessment of being
I
smart,
gotcha.
being dumb.
I
You
just
know,
think,
like
I think acquiring knowledge teaches me how dumb I am. Seriously, that's how I feel. Like when I get done reading a book, I feel dumber. I honestly, I do. And I mean, I'm not trying to sound like that to round myself out or anything. But if I don't feel that way, I feel like if I go put down a book and I feel like, man, I got this covered now, something bad's going to happen and I'm going to trip. But I'm better if I think, my goodness, I didn't know any of that stuff. How have I gotten this far? You know, with not
so
knowing that, you
So this
know?
is what I'm trying to, I hear what you're saying. This is what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
trying
I
to
get
say. Okay. If I read a bunch of books and I
it.
don't do anything creative or productive with that knowledge, I feel like that's kind of dumb to not actually apply the knowledge, to not
Hmm.
actually create anything. I feel like that's dumb. But I feel like um, just because you weren't aware of something and then you learn something, if you're
Hmm.
able to understand it, that doesn't mean you're dumb. But I see what you're saying. It makes you feel dumb because you're more aware of what you don't know. So I get
Yeah,
what you're
yeah. I guess that's the Socratic thing is that he got all the way through his life, and then he realized that he didn't know anything. What there's those
for certain.
epistemological.
For certain. Yeah.
Well, just well, you don't know anything. Like I've heard a guy in a debate one time. He said, "You don't know if you don't know where your car is. You think that it's in the parking lot right now, but you don't know that." Like I don't know that you exist. You don't know that I exist. It could the whole world could be what's the term for that?
Illusion.
Yeah, the whole thing's an illusion. But what's you know the joke? Descartes, Descartes. He goes into a bar and the bartender gives him a drink, and then he gets done, and then the bartender says, "Would you like another drink?" And Descartes says, "I think not," and he vanishes. You know, because I think, therefore I am. You know,
Right,
cogito
right.
ergo
Yeah.
sum. Yeah,
Yeah.
so but that's I don't know, but that's I try to live that way because it's especially like I like to read history now, and I'll read something about history and I'll think, my goodness, I've had all these opinions of history for so long, and I didn't know that. You know, that changes everything. I don't know. It I'm constantly rearranging the books in my head, trying to make everything fit. So,
Right.
but okay,
Trying to
so
make everything make sense. So going
yeah,
back to our question, what do you
original
think
question.
this says about our question? Are people born inherently good or evil, inherently innocent or guilty? Do you
Well,
think it's saying anything about that?
I was going to ask you if you thought that, let's say, take the allegory on face value, and the person is there's a person chained below, and then there's a person now that has escaped. Do you think that their goodness or badness, do you think that they're different from one another in that way? Would you say that the person chained below is good or bad, whereas the other person is the other? You know what I mean?
Well, from an ethical sense, it seems like there you can't really base their moral, like when you say good or bad, if you mean like morally, I would need more information to determine that.
Or go is it we're guilty or innocent? Do you think?
So, in a sense, I definitely feel like this sort of suggests that the people in the cave are innocent because it's not really their fault that they're judging the world based on their six senses, what they can perceive with their sight, with their
So
hearing.
long as they're not absolute about it. Because remember in the story, he said that there would be people that were academics that would be able to guess what's coming next and what noise the next shadow might make. But in reality, you know that none of that's real. It's all fake. So it depends on what they do with that knowledge, right? If
Well,
they're good or bad down there.
yeah, I'm just saying it seems like it seems like you could interpret the analogy as people are born inherently innocent versus guilty because there's nothing in this text that talks about the people in the cave as if they should feel guilty.
You
So,
don't think that part where he said that in the cave that you would go up, you'd see the sun, you'd realize all the stuff down there with shadows and all that jazz. It's all just shadow figures, puppets. Remember, he said that you'd come back down and you'd see people that were experts at being able to tell you what's coming next, and they would be expert at the shadows, but really they don't know anything. You don't think those people maybe are guilty of a type of a very obvious hubris, a very obvious arrogance, and it's very obvious to tell that they're wrong. I mean, they think they're right, and they're an expert in a very small scope, but not in a real thing. You know what I mean?
yeah, I don't know what you're asking. So the question is, are people born inherently
Mm-hmm.
innocent or guilty? So I'm trying to think about what this, if it's saying anything about when people are born.
I'm with you.
So when people are
Yeah.
born, they're in the cave. No one's born out of the cave in this
Yeah,
context,
yeah, yeah. I'm with you.
right? So I'm just thinking about how they're describing the people in the cave to answer the question.
I think that it's yeah, I get you. I feel like he's saying that I don't know it because there would be some that were complacent with it in the cave that were okay with the shadows and had no intent to even go up if they had the opportunity. And there were other people that would be so complacent with it that they would think they were experts, and that would make them a bad person. And then there's people who could escape and come back down and be okay with going right back to the shadows, and that would be a bad person, like a guilty person. And maybe they were always guilty in their nature. You know what I mean? Because they saw all that light, but they still chose to ignore it. Um, I like, oh, as example, like the Sermon on the Mount, the Jesus character.
Yeah.
If he had had that whole experience with Satan tempting him, and he didn't come back and do the Sermon on the Mount, he
Mhm.
would be guilty because he didn't deliver that message that was so profound. He would be the bodhisattva that didn't tell anybody, right? So
Yeah.
he would have been a guilty person from the jump. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like
Huh?
this text is definitely not directly answering the question, but there's different things you can infer about the text related to the question.
Mm-hmm.
So, it does seem to suggest that it's the ethical thing to do once you come out of the cave and you acquire knowledge and enlightenment. It's your responsibility to go back into the cave to inform everyone else to bring them out into the light. So
Are you saving?
perhaps
Yeah.
it's saying that if you don't do that, then you should feel guilty. But to answer the question, are people born inherently innocent or guilty? It seems like it's leaning more toward people are born innocent because when they're in the cave, there's nothing in the text um, that calls them guilty, that calls the people in the cave guilty for being there. It's very sympathetic. The people in the cave are written, okay, like he poses the questions, like, can you blame them for perceiving the world the way they do?
Yeah.
And
I get you. It's interesting because we're saying that they're ignorant, but they're not willful of it. They're innocent because they're not in charge of their own ignorance. You know what I
they
mean?
can't
Like
help
they're
it, right?
no, they no, they can't. They can't. I don't know. I get what you're saying. I guess I agree with you. I don't want to agree with you. I'd rather think that that type of ignorance is a type of guilt. That it would, but I think you're right. But I don't want that to be true. You know what I mean?
Well,
Because that
it's,
kind
you
of.
know, it's open to interpretation. Like, I don't, again, this text doesn't really
Mhm.
directly address the question. So you can infer different
No, I
things.
mean,
I don't,
I agree with. I guess of course, I'm projecting my own thoughts onto it. But if you use like the Matrix example to make it more modern day, if the Neo character at the end of the story would have just went right back into the Matrix and not, and just lived his life, which they offer him that plenty of times,
Mhm.
um, would he would be at that point his ignorance would be willful. He's okay with being dumb. Whereas the other one, he was innocent when he's born again, so to speak, and brought out of the matrix. So I don't know. I think you're right. And I agree with you. It doesn't answer the question, but it gives us more material for if you're born guilty or innocent.
Yeah.
Another person taking a stab at man's development, kind of thing.
Yeah. And guilty and innocent are sort of like ethical qualities, right? So it's kind of hard to answer that question. Uh, but I feel like, these texts like this, it does kind of make you think about if you're born with a blank slate and all you can do is interpret the world based on your limited societal uh, uh, upbringing, right? It's
Sure,
like,
sure.
how much accountability can we hold people for the way they were brought up, right? Because all we have
Mhm.
is our eyes, our ears. So I don't know. I feel like it does write them in a sympathetic way. So that's why I feel like if it's saying one thing or the other, it's leaning more towards people are born innocent. But
So
I don't know.
do you appreciate this as an analogy? And I don't know if you will or not, but as you're saying that, it makes me think of. Do you know how they have those shows where the chefs, the Ramsay guy, he's screaming at people because
Yeah.
this tastes good and this doesn't?
Yeah.
I If I likened that to this and said that that would make it kind of an awful thing. If you have the best palate and you can make the best foods, to go into somebody else's kitchen and say their food is disgusting, is kind of like screaming at the people looking at those shadows. Like you're being mean to them because you know better. You think you know better. It doesn't matter, but you think you know better. Is that fair? And a fair
Is
analogy?
is what fair? I mean the
Like
analogy between like um
being
cooking.
a chef and knowing the expert foods and knowing, like, I know that my beans that are freshly made are better than your canned beans. The person eating the canned beans is the one hooked to the cave in the
But
cave, and
better
I'm
in
kind of
what way?
screaming at
Like
them.
healthier or that they
No, just
taste
better,
better?
meaning better, that better to my taste. It's more profound. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just
Yeah.
likening it to this. Does that make sense? So,
I don't
so in
think
other
it's
words,
a I
yeah,
don't think it's a great analogy just because everyone has
it
different
doesn't feel
taste.
good now.
Everyone
Yeah,
has different taste buds, and so
they
to
do. They do.
taste is very subjective. So I don't think that's the
Mhm.
best analogy. But I do love the analogy of the cave though, because it really does kind of like as I'm reading that, it allows me to step into the shoes of the people in the cave and ask myself, how would I, like Glauco, like how would I, how would I interpret the world? If all I have to interpret the world is what's in this cave, how would I know any better? How would I know there's more to life outside the cave?
Mhm.
So I don't
And
really
what?
blame them for having that limited viewpoint,
Hey,
right?
and so uh, what if in the story, when the person was released and they went to the top, right? What if it was nighttime? No, seriously. I mean,
Yeah.
how that would change
Yeah.
the paradigm of it? You would
Yeah.
see this vast darkness, and maybe the moon, maybe not, but you'd see this vast darkness, and it would appear as if the shadows on the wall were it, and that
Yeah.
everything else is just space,
Yeah.
just empty space,
It also
void.
sort of poses the question, perhaps there is no reality, only perception.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
in this text, it's basically saying, no, there is a reality. You just have to step out of your comfort zone to see it. You have to experience, you have to step out of the cave. You have to step out of what's familiar and what's comfortable in order to see it. But
Hmm.
I feel like that's what this text is saying, that there is a reality that we are capable of understanding if we step outside of our comfort zone.
I
So
get you. I get you. It's interesting. So we got a little closer to answering this question. Right? A little
not
closer.
really. I don't think this is the I don't think this is the best text that leads us to that answer, but
Hmm.
I still really love this text. I do think it's kind of funny though that it's a narrative between those two characters because all Glauco ever does is just say, "Yes, that's true. Yes, I see what you mean.
Hmm.
Yes." I think it would be more interesting to have the opposing view. Like if Glauco actually opposed Socrates,
Hmm.
I feel like this would be a much more interesting
Well,
live.
in the Apologia, when he's debating, he's essentially, yes, that's exactly what's happening. He's making a statement, and the other person's arguing back, and but he's drawing out that person to his perspective. Yeah, it's much
Yeah.
better. It's much better.
I
I
think
agree.
that would
I
be more
agree with that.
interesting because this one, Glauco's just like, yes, you're right. Yes, I see what you mean. Oh,
Yeah,
wait, what?
yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with
So,
you. I'm with you. I agree. Well, I mean, if anything, we can use this as fodder for our furtherance of this discovery for the month to try to understand that everything we run into, because we started with Jesus and he had a mission or he had an experience and he came back and he talked to everybody about it. Alexa, stop. He came back and talked to everybody about it, and then now this one is kind of like a third person version of the same story. So we're seeing that people go through growth and they change a lot. So we're seeing the growth, but we haven't necessarily figured out what they were like when they were pupa, like when they were a baby. Were they guilty of anything? Jesus he had an experience and he came back and said, "We are guilty and you're going to need my help." And then Socrates is saying, "Hey, no, you're innocent and you're going to need my help." Um, so we have two different views of two people that went through the same experience. So we got to find somebody else that went through the same experience again. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting from this. So yeah. So I don't know. We're a little closer, maybe not.
I don't know if we're any
Um,
closer at all, honestly, but I'm still curious to continue examining these texts and asking that question.
yes.
And kind of diving into, okay, what does this text say about this question? Uh,
Hmm.
so let
And
us know
we've
what
got
you think. If you're
yeah.
listening, let us know your thoughts. Let us know what you think about the text we just read, about Plato and Socrates, and
And
Glauco.
we've got Nietzsche, Rousseau.
Mhm.
Gosh, how many other? We've got quite a few neat people coming that
Yeah.
we're going to get into that are we're gonna keep asking this question from these people and try to figure it out. So
Yes. And
it's going to be fun. If
at
you
the
have
end of
anybody,
January, we will do a live stream. So if you'd like to join our live stream and continue the conversation live, be on the
mhm,
lookout for that.
yes,
But in the
yes,
meantime, stay curious, stay open-minded,
don't
keep
know
asking
anything,
questions. And
know nothing, know
I do
nothing.
think it is comfortable. I think it is important to feel comfortable in what you don't know. Like it's okay to admit you don't know things. That's being
Mhm.
human. So,
The oldest question in man allegedly is quo warranto, which is by what right. So
yep.
that's a great why. That's a great question.
Yeah,
Nothing wrong with that question. It's a great way to start out the day. Sure.
by
So
what
by
right?
what right? So
Cool.
mm,
All right. Well, thanks so much for listening. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments in the chat, and we will see you again soon.
yay.